Hi, welcome to Third Spacing, a podcast where we discuss important issues on the peripheries of medicine. Today we have with us Dr. Gerald Sng, who is a registrar in endocrinology and has been researching the topic of burnout since his medical school days in 2016. I'm Ting Hong, a third-year medical student, and being on the cusp of my clinical years, I think it's especially pertinent for myself and my peers to chart this conversation on burnout. So, Dr. Sng, could you tell us a bit about how you first got started researching in burnout?
So actually, I think the genesis of my interest was really started kind of in 2012, which is the first survey that we started to do in medical students regarding empathy levels. And it's something that we continue to do cross-sectionally and longitudinally as well. But that led to our first paper where we did notice that, levels of empathy do decline over the course of your medical school. And, we thought that might be something important to flag up as a problem, which is the first paper we published on the topic in 2016. Why the interest? I think, medical school traditionally has been very good at delivering, at empowering us with the hard skills to be doctors. Knowledge, figuring out diagnoses, learning about treatments, etc., etc. But I think it's quite under-recognized. Oh, well, it's very well recognized, but that the soft skills, talking to patients, understanding them, connecting with them, it's not something that's quite so easily taught. Definitely not through pedagogical means, typically. But it's something that I think people have commented about doctors in our culture, that sometimes they feel that perhaps you're missing that kind of human touch. And we kind of wanted to see whether the genesis of that is right from the start or something that happens later on in the career. But, that's what we found. It's something that kind of starts from the start and it's a whole continuum, starting from when you first enter as a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed medical student through your clinical years, and then, of course, being a house officer, medical officer, and so on as you progress through training, if you do indeed progress through training. Yeah. And I feel quite strongly, they're kind of two facets of the same thing. As you become more burnt out, you definitely become less able to relate to other people. It's not surprising, I suppose, if you have that emotional, that lack of emotional adequacy if within yourself, that it kind of just spills over to your outward-facing interactions with other people as well. And, higher levels of burnout did correlate with lower levels of empathy in that study.
Right.
Although there are, if you look at it from a statistical perspective, the statistical model, or at least the figures that tell you how closely they are related, but they don't kind of explain the whole full story. So why do we become burnt out and why do we become less empathetic? These are all things that are harder to delve into. When you do surveys and all that, there are certain associations that you may pick up. But I think they kind of just skirt the periphery of a whole issue. And then, what we've done so far is just trying to make sense and kind of figure out what the trends are, so that it's something that other people can take a deeper dive into or look more closely into, I suppose. Yeah.
And so what are some trends that you have noticed then?
Well, as we get more senior, we tend to get a bit more burnt out, it's a nature of life, I think. It's chronic repeated exposure to things that are perhaps a bit more depersonalizing. Increased stress, increased workload, other pressures of adulthood that perhaps don't quite come into play so much when you are younger or in medical school. Marriage, kids, etc., does seem to have an impact on people's psyche as well, I suppose. But I don't know. To some extent, it's directly related to the duration of time that you spend training. So there must be something about the training itself, or at least the environment in which you are working, that is contributing to this. Yeah.
And to me, it sounds like you're describing burnout as a kind of protective mechanism in a way, or an adaptation to the demands of working life.
We can talk about what the concept of burnout is actually. Right?
Sure.
So what is burnout? I think it's important to figure it out. The concept that I like to use, and I think that we used in our paper because it's quite easy to understand, kind of groups it into three domains. Depersonalisation, meaning you feel that you as a human are less valued, etc., etc. Emotional exhaustion, which explains itself, and a sense of inadequate personal achievement. And I think, if you break it down into these aspects, anecdotally at least, you could see how various ways of working as a junior doctor could contribute to amplifying or reducing some of these things.
Right.
So if you think about emotional exhaustion, I still remember, many of the patients that I first treated when I was a first posting house officer in general surgery. Patients that stay for 1 month, you become quite close to them, become even emotionally involved with whether or not they're doing well or doing badly. And I remember the poor outcomes of these patients used to affect me quite a bit, honestly. But, as time passes, I find that, and this is again my personal experience, you kind of begin to lose the ability to make such really emotional connections to your patients. That part of it may be the protective mechanism that you say, because you don't kind of want to be disappointed or feel bad, etc. If patients have a poor outcome, which many of them do. Or you just get a bit more numb or a bit more overexposed, I suppose, to the realities of life. People die, people have bad diagnoses every day, people have bad outcomes every day.
Yep. And
to some extent, you kind of lose the emotional investment after a while, because it seems to be part of life, which it is part of life. But there's also a beauty in that part of life that I think some of us miss. But anyway, so that's emotional exhaustion, right? Depersonalization. So as a junior doctor, I think you don't always have a sense of what the big picture is. Oftentimes you can feel like a unit in the system. I'm a house officer, I go to work for XYZ team today. There's not enough manpower, they have rotated me to ABC team instead. I go there for 2 days, then I go back to my original team. I am a cog in the machine, right? There's a lot of, it's very understandable. And it's how our healthcare system operates to some extent because of manpower exigencies. We're not like the systems of the past where you belong to this consultant's firm, you live or die for this consultant, you go on call 7 days a week for this consultant, but then this is your team, this is your family, right? But now we are a bit more flexible. And I think part of that was salutary, right? You want enough manpower for patients, you want doctors to have enough rest as well. But then you lose that sense of personal agency, which I think is a strong driver and a strong motivator for human action. We can talk about that later. It's also related to the concept of job satisfaction and all that. Then we go back to the last thing, right, which is personal achievement. First I guess we come from, and this is quite often repeated, I feel to some extent it's a bit of a fallacy, but to some extent it's also true. As doctors, as medical students, we are used to achievement, right? So you do well in school, you need to have done well in school to get into medical school. You will need to have had good grades, which is achievement, seen at least in our culture as an achievement in and of itself. Then there are very many stellar people who have outstanding extracurricular curriculum vitae and activities, even before coming to medicine or even outside of medicine. And I'm sure the both of you are no exception as well. But then you can't kind of come into the system and you work and you kind of realize that where you start off as a junior house officer and the goal that you want to achieve, at least if you think that, specialty training is for you, or even if non-specialty training is for you, you still need a time period to get there. It can seem very far, it can seem very distant. You don't seem to have very much progress towards your personal growth and personal goals on a day-to-day kind of basis. And so I think that erodes at the sense of personal achievement, and contributes to more burnout in that sense. So, each of these 3 domains, I feel it's a bit organic how they are affected by working as a junior doctor, but if you break it down, I think it does make sense why it happens as you progress through working life as a doctor.
Yeah. I think you've given us a really, really comprehensive review of what burnout means and what factors contribute to burnout. But my question is, do you think burnout is a symptom of a larger problem?
We talked about increasing rates of burnout as you progress through working life. We talked about reducing rates of empathy, but there are also things like job satisfaction, the feeling of contributing to the organization, the feeling of happiness. It's an existential concept, but the feeling of happiness, motivation, meaning and purpose, and so on.
Okay, but you seem to be saying that we tend to experience burnout in our strive towards some sort of self-actualization.
Yes, very much so. I think uniquely to medicine, because of the general personality of individuals who enter medicine, there's some sort of you need to have some sort of inner drive, I suppose, to do something or be something or have something, to go through 5 years of medical school, sit for lots of exams, be a house officer, do many calls and all that. There is a bit of a tension between that inner drive and what sometimes we can experience or what we actually achieve. And so in that sense, yes.
But if we were to broaden it beyond the individual level, would you say a high prevalence of burnout experienced among local doctors, is this reflective of a more systemic issue?
I think that's a complex question. I think there are probably two parts to that question. If you look into it, what you are asking is, number one, is there something with our system that makes burnout inevitable? Number two, and you say issue, right? Then what is the problem if our residents or our junior doctors are getting burnout? Yeah. Is there something in our system that makes burnout inevitable? Inbuilt, I think every system, there is an inherent tendency towards burnout in every system, especially if you stay in each system long enough. So from to that extent, yes, I would say is to some extent inevitable from working in our system. Then should it be like that? Or are there ways to improve that? And what is the problem with burnout if our junior doctors are getting burnout? So maybe I'll answer the last question first. So I think what we've tried to do in more recent years is to take a little step away from just thinking about the concepts of burnout and empathy and so on, right? But I want to talk about what the real world consequences are. So it's bad because, number one, if your doctors are reporting more medical errors, then obviously it's bad, right? Yeah. If our doctors are not so satisfied in our jobs and want to quit, obviously that's also bad for the system as a whole because you don't have enough manpower, especially with the manpower pressures of the last few years with the pandemic and all. Yeah. So that's, I suppose, the practical, the real world facing problem part of it. Can things be better? I believe they can be better. Then how should they be better? We can talk about that, I guess.
Yeah, so I think you've previously been an advocate for introducing systemic mentorship programs, even during orientation, and teaching basic skills such as mindfulness to our junior doctors. But some might say that these are perhaps only scratching the surface, so they are symptomatic management rather than addressing the issue at the core. So what's your response?
So I actually agree with what you're saying. I think it's helpful for all of us as individuals to have strategies to deal with burnout, to deal with depersonalization, to deal with negative emotions. But what I increasingly find is that people are recognizing that burnout is a problem, right?
Yep.
But then what is the organization, what do organizations sometimes do when they say, oh, our staff are burnt out? A lot of the time I feel that responsibility is being pushed to the individual. You are burnt out because you cannot cope. You are burnt out because you cannot, you don't have these strategies. If I taught you how to do this, then maybe you wouldn't be burnt out, So then that's where you see all these like resilience module, e-learning module, compulsory, whatever, this and that, And sometimes it leads to some nice things like they have free ice cream and whatnot, have a concert, but telling you, hey, try harder doesn't really work, So but I mean, it will be good. So from, you said I have advocated for these things. I think it's good. I think it's useful, but I think pushing the responsibility to the individual to do these things to solve your problem of burnout probably is not the right answer. The right answer, as you rightly say, is to look at the whole system. What is it about the system that promotes certain things more than other things, like promotes burnout more than, than the renewal and self-renewal and so on. And let's see if we can address some of these factors. As I said, I think burnout is kind of built into any sort of job system. But if you can kind of mitigate some of these factors, then it's good. The stressor, the pressure on the individual who's at the center is less. So maybe whatever, intrinsically, your motivation or whatnot that you have to deal with these stressors can help to deal with these stressors.
And I think you very rightly pointed out that there's a tendency to shift the gap for improvement on the individuals. But how could we then encourage a mindset shift away from the individual towards reflecting on our systems and thinking of institutional change?
I want to go into this in a little bit greater detail. So as part of our junior doctor study in 2021, right, we did send a job satisfaction questionnaire out. But I think the kind of answers that kind of stood out, or at least the domains that were really problematic, is things like my organization listens to my feedback and I feel that my feedback makes a difference. It's things like I feel I'm contributing meaningfully to my organization, you know. These are cultural, right? So how we change that? Honestly, I don't really know. Honestly, I don't, yeah. Resourcing, our junior doctors are tremendously well resourced, you know. But, you know, resourcing is just one part of it. And I think our junior doctors who answered our survey did acknowledge that the resourcing that we are provided is actually pretty good. But it's more of these, you know, organizational culture kind of things that are a bit lacking. And that kind of ties us back to the earlier point that we mentioned about self-agency, right? Right, these things are to deal, kind of to do with your individual's worth of self in your organization, right? Whether or not you felt valued as an individual, right? You listen to your feedback. Whether or not you feel you're contributing meaningfully, in the concept of personal achievement or personal accomplishment that we mentioned. So yeah, I mean, how, I don't know, but you know, it's at least if we can recognize that, then we can have a conversation about it, and you know, people with brighter ideas surely may be able to think of something. Yeah. You also mentioned something about, you know, shifting the responsibility to individuals. I feel a lot of the stress in doctors is because we do at your junior level, you do a lot of work that is not really doctoring. Right? So a lot of responsibilities are actually shifted to the junior doctors. Like listing patients for your clinic, listing patients for your OT, even simply very, very prosaic stuff like, you know, logging into a portal every week to log your hours, which takes like 15 minutes every time. Are things that, do you really need to do these things to train a doctor, you know?
Right, so it sounds like you've invoked two main ideas. One is fostering a positive workplace culture, and the other is streamlining our processes so we don't lose our threshold for contributing meaningfully to our workplace.
Yeah, I agree with both. And to just expound a bit on your on the second part. I mean, we all went into medicine, I believe, to actually treat patients and to help people, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you lose that human connection, you lose that sense that I am dealing with patients directly and I am, you know, interacting with them, the human connection, the human touch, then you spend most of your time in front of the computer, then it's very easy to see why it can easily snowball. Definitely. And then you start feeling all these depersonalization. You don't feel the meaning and the agency, you know, the meaning of the job that you wanted to do. I honestly believe our junior doctors or our doctors don't have a problem with working hard. But if I felt that, you know, I'm doing meaningful work, that I'm contributing to patients, I see patients get better, I don't mind working harder.
Yeah.
If it's something useful, you know, because that's what we want to do. But if you ask me to stay back until 9 o'clock to prepare for meeting, then I get a bit upset, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I get you. Yeah. And indeed, I have seen registrars or MOs whom I've worked with. They are post-call, and yet they still take time out to teach us about new things. Yeah. They still tend so carefully to every single patient. Yeah. So I really hear where you're coming from on that aspect. Yeah. And so it sounds like, therefore, there's a need for us to perhaps review some of the bureaucratic processes in our local healthcare institutions to perhaps make a call for efficiency and to reduce or perhaps to redistribute the work that doctors have to do.
Yep, and I fully agree. This is a finding from our paper that we published in Annals Academy of Medicine last year, where we looked at the contributing of working hours to patient error, right? Our self-reported patient error. the component that is attributable to non-clinical working hours, means all the admin stuff that we talked about, is much, much, much higher than the clinical working hours. We always think the clinical working hours is a problem, but actually it's not really. I mean, there is of course a continuous additive effect, but the slope for that looks a bit like this. So it's a slight gradual slope, but the slope for non-clinical hours is a bit more exponential.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's perfect. It will be perfect for everybody if we can reduce that component of it. Spend more of your time on actual doctoring or actual patient care. I think people will feel better. Patient care will be better as well, and we probably will end up having less rates of burnout. Having said that, I also fully appreciate it's easier said than done. I also fully appreciate that there are a lot of admin processes that have been baked into the system.
Yep.
There are accreditation requirements, ACGMA requirements, and so on. Which is why I think what needs to be done is really to look at the system as a whole and work out what are essential and what are not essential. What is a doctor's job? What is not a doctor's job? What there is resource to do and what there is not resource to do, and kind of figure it out from a by principle basis, because it's very hard to address little issues here and there, because it inevitably creates some more work for somebody else. But taking a step back, I think we kind of need to look at the whole thing from a bigger picture. I will fully admit that at my level and my seniority, I probably don't have a good idea of what the bigger picture is and what the overall strategic directions for our healthcare system are. But I would hope, I suppose, and I would believe that that's something that our seniors would be doing.
And are there any other significant findings or approaches you'd recommend based on your findings from your research?
We do need to listen to our junior doctors more, because that's when we find out what the problems are. But also, I think we need to be able to communicate with our junior doctors better.
How so?
So I think, we talked about all the tension amongst all these things, right? Everybody want to work less, everybody want to have more hours, everybody wants to have some sort of a career in public healthcare, which is good. I mean, many people do, at least. There's some inherent tension between all of these. It's not very well explained, right? But I think, if we explain that to the junior doctors, we have understood that you are concerned about this, working hours, calls and all that, but these are our considerations and that's why we cannot do it. I think people are going to be a bit more accepting and understanding. You probably are very well aware of all the social media meme accounts about
Yep.
Yeah, I think a lot of the dissatisfaction is because it seems like decisions, policies all from on top
down,
and then you just there at the bottom what's happening. The rain is falling on your head, that kind of thing. But I think if you really explain what is happening properly, then I think people are more accepting, because everybody is intelligent and everybody kind of wants to help. I mean, related to that also, when we design our healthcare policies or manpower policies, things that affect the junior doctors, you should include the junior doctors in your focus group.
Definitely.
So I think that's what MOH has tried to do quite recently in the last 1 year. 1.5 years, they went around all the hospitals, right, and had focus group discussions with big groups of different junior doctors. They had town halls and all that, and they got some feedback, and I think they got a consulting agency to process the feedback. So that's a good first step. I don't know when was the last time it's been done before. It's the first time they ever did something like that has been done since I was a house officer in 2016. So I suppose at least for the last 8 years, it's the first time. It's a good first step, I mean, listen and then include people who know what things are like on the ground when you develop ground level processes, and then we see where things go from there.
And so would you say you're optimistic that our systems are progressing towards perhaps a better direction for our juniors?
I think so. I think there's more recognition that our juniors are burnt out. I mean, people often comment, right? This is the very, very common comment. Oh, why are our juniors getting more burnt out? The nature of it's not that we are having more work, but then we know that the nature of the work has changed. So it is quite common. We hear it quite a bit. So people are acknowledging that there is a problem and kind of trying to look at trying to recognize, kind of recognizing where the problem may be. But I want to take you back to what we said earlier, right? The problem is also not just systems, but the problem is culture.
Right.
Yeah. So I think, dealing with system problems is easier, dealing with culture problems is harder. How we figure that out, I have absolutely no idea, but I am optimistic that if we recognize there's a problem, we will try to fix it. And I have great respect for our senior leadership who recognize that there's a problem and actively talk to our juniors and try to figure things out. I think there are many leaders who are leading by example in our healthcare system to try and improve things for their juniors. So I am optimistic. I just don't know how it will happen, but I am optimistic.
And on this note on culture, I think you've alluded to the idea in the past that Singapore occupies a very unique context where we have certain social cultural factors that may predispose our population, even beyond healthcare, to feelings of burnout. So could you elaborate more on this?
We are a lot more hierarchical, I feel, compared to... I will preface this by saying I have never worked anywhere outside of Singapore, ever.
Sure.
At most it's just do observership in medical school. So I am saying this just is quite possibly one-sided. But what I feel compared to what people who come back from overseas tell me is that we are a lot more hierarchical.
Okay.
Deference to elders. Not that it's a bad thing. Not that it's a bad thing. Whereby things kind of flow in one direction. It is cultural in Asian context and Asian cultures, I suppose. But to some extent also it's a bit cultural in medicine because medicine as was first developed, right, is an apprenticeship model. You have a master and an apprentice.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean the term master and apprentice kind of tells you already that it is built to be a hierarchical system. We tried to move away from that. You do residency, you have this, but kind of can't really get away from that core concept. And honestly, I think it's not a bad thing because that's how I think it is a good way to learn. You talk about mentorship, right? That's a really good way to learn. But at the same time, because of the way it builds in this kind of culture, then there are certain more cultural predispositions to the directionality of ideas, the directionality of instructions, and so on.
So just to bring this interview towards the tail end, it seems like you're still raring to go to continue going deeper into this field and perhaps advocating changes in our system and the way we approach healthcare. So what's keeping you going after so many years of research? What continues to inspire you to put this much effort?
Firstly, I think I recognize that by improving the well-being of our junior doctors, and I say well-being, I mean not just working conditions, which is what we often focus on, but really the well-being, your internal mental well-being and emotional well-being, you will improve patient care. We always talk about improving healthcare system, health systems research and all that, but you will improve patient care by improving the health workforce. I think that is under-recognized, and I feel that there is something strongly that we can leverage on and improve on.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing, and secondly also I still am not far enough away from being a junior doctor. I've just been a SR for a couple of years. And as an SR, you are actually still a junior doctor, by the way. I am still in training, right? So I do understand the struggles and the frustrations, and I feel that why should we settle for being dissatisfied and complaining and just grumbling all the time? Why not try to strive for something better and be happy when we work and make the hospital a happier place. There's enough sadness and there's enough suffering in the hospital. Right? The doctor also suffering a bit sad.
Definitely.
So I guess that's how I feel. Probably a bit idealistic. I don't know, but we'll see.
Right, and it sounds like you seem to view research as a good vehicle to generate these recommendations and empower change.
Yeah. I agree. I think so because of how we are trained. So healthcare systems are mainly run by healthcare people. We are trained on data. We are trained to look at evidence and respond appropriately. So if we say if we believe that there's a problem, how we must prove that there's a problem. How do you prove that there's a problem? You need data.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's the main reason. Yeah.
And how do you think that this social conversation on burnout will evolve in perhaps the next 5 or 10 years?
I think it's quite well accepted already, right? So people are not afraid to talk about how they're feeling. That's probably perhaps different from how things were 10 years ago. So just openness and more acceptance, just more recognition, which is the first step, as we said earlier. I think that's one change. Yeah. Then I think more and more we will have more openness to having juniors advocate change from the ground up.
Fear to speak up.
Yeah, I hope
even
so.
in positions.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. I think that it's something that we also mentioned in our annals paper. People don't dare to speak up because your bosses are also the people who grade you and are also the people who take you into residency and so on. So there's a lot of built-in reluctance. It's a bit Singaporean also,
Yeah.
Like I don't want to be marked down compared to my peers. It's again idealistic. Life doesn't work that way because humans are still emotional beings. But we should try to move away from that fear. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You've given us a great insight into the factors shaping burnout and what I might expect to see in the next 5 years as a young budding medical student. So thank you so much for your time today with us. And for our viewers who were inspired by this conversation today, you can look up Dr. Gerald Sng, an endocrinology resident, and some of his many research works which have been published online. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Sng, for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, this has been Third Spacing. See you again for our next episode.